Welcome back to the guided video tour of this document, the Timeline.pdf spreadsheet. In the last video, we completed the 430-year section that ends when Moses led the Israelites out of the land of Egypt. The next section of the timeline will go from the Exodus until the 4th year of Solomon, when the temple foundation was laid in the 2nd month, and that was the 480th year after the children of Israel came out of the land of Egypt. The chronology of this period will also be verified by the 300-year span between when Sihon was defeated and when Jephthah began to judge. When the period of the judges has been accurately plotted on a timeline, there will be 300 years between these two events, and there will be 479 years between these two events. If both of these criteria are not met, a timeline cannot be considered accurate. Archbishop Ussher's famous timeline got the 479-year period correct, but does not adhere to the 300-year span between Sihon and Jephthah. Ussher has 264 years between these two events. This error misapplies 36 years from the period of the judges and adds them to the time of King David and Saul. This actually facilitates another error in Ussher's timeline, the length of King Saul's reign. New Testament translators incorrectly assigned the 40 years in Acts 13:21 to Saul instead of David. Yet the chronological and geographical details regarding the Ark of the Covenant define a span of 20 years that completely encompasses Saul's reign. Most chronologists have ignored this fact that limits Saul's reign to less than 20 years. Gerard Gerteau, in his Dating the Biblical Chronology, correctly puts Jephthah 300 years after Sihon was defeated, but he also ignores the Ark chronology and assigns 40 years to Saul. He accomplishes this by incorrectly starting the 479-year period from when Sihon was defeated instead of from the Exodus, 40 years too late. Dr. Floyd Nolan Jones, in his book The Chronology of the Old Testament, correctly places Jephthah 300 years after Sihon, but fails to reconcile the chronology between and after. Eli's 40 years of judging are dismissed as overlapping, and King Saul is incorrectly credited with reigning 40 years. With all of these uncertainties, it's no wonder that the idea of a precise and reliable Bible chronology has been dismissed by both secular scholars and Christians alike. Even Dr. Jones says in his book regarding an absolute chronology, quote, "Any such assignment is not realistic of any chronology of prolonged duration. Even the serious notion of an absolute chronology stretches credulity and borders on the ludicrous." End quote. The good news is this is no longer true. The Timeline.pdf spreadsheet clearly reconciles all of the previously misunderstood time frames that have kept us from having an absolute timeline. As we continue through this spreadsheet, we will show how the period of the judges is reconciled, and we'll show the precise years of the reigns of King Saul and King David, and we'll untangle the previously unsolved mystery of the divided kingdom chronology, step by step and year by year. Edwin Thiel attempted to reconcile Israel and Judah through the divided kingdom, but his chronology is filled with fabricated overlapping co-reigns and unnecessary rules for counting years differently in different situations. As a result, Thiel's chronology uses a lot of speculation to support his theories, and the reader is left with a confusing conglomeration that still has many unresolved problems. Well, since we're now claiming to have an absolute timeline, we may wonder why we still don't know the names of the pharaohs met by Abraham, Joseph, and Moses. So let's take a look at that. You'll notice that this chart uses the years from the flood, taken from the second column, and the year of the Exodus is year 797, as it corresponds on the chart. But the next chart spans before the flood, so we'll use the years from creation, found in the first column. So the year of the Exodus is going to be 2453 on our new chart. So we have our absolute chronology from creation, with each row of the spreadsheet representing a year, and when we start adding people and events from outside the Bible, we'll use the same criteria that we have been using all along. We first look for a solid synchronism point. We get this from the Mesopotamian Chronicles, ABC 5, and Jeremiah, chapters 25 and 46. This synchronizes Jehoiakim's 4th year to Nabopolassar's 21st year. We know the month and the day of the month after the Battle of Carchemish, when Nabopolassar died and Nebuchadnezzar became king. We see that the Bible uses the regnal year counting system for Nebuchadnezzar because it calls this year his first year, while the Mesopotamian Chronicles use the accession year counting system for Nebuchadnezzar because it calls this year his accession year. So we'll need to keep that in mind when referencing ABC 5 so we don't get confused and look up the wrong year. So now all of the events in Nabopolassar's reign from the Mesopotamian Chronicles can be synchronized with the years of Josiah. Likewise, the events in Nebuchadnezzar's reign can be synchronized to the years of Jehoiakim and to the years of Zedekiah. This area in red represents the Babylonian history that anchors to the timeline from the beginning of Ptolemy's canon around 747 BC until the destruction of Babylon. Babylonian history before this time is very fragmented, so what we can know is very limited. For instance, Hammurabi is a famous Babylonian king that reigned about 1,000 years before the start of Ptolemy's canon, and we know that he was the 6th Babylonian king. But when trying to determine the first year of his reign, the best that Assyriologists can do is place his year in one of 3 possible centuries. The Mesopotamian Chronicles also give us good synchronisms for Assyria that anchor to the timeline from around the start of Ptolemy's canon until just after Nineveh was destroyed. This gives us an incredible amount of insight into surrounding historical events that coincide with events in the Bible. We can continue to synchronize the Assyrian kings before the Mesopotamian Chronicles by using the Limu list, and that gets us as far back as the reign of Jehu in Israel. From there, we know the names of the Assyrian kings and the lengths of their reigns from the Assyrian king list, and that gets us back to just after the time of Jephthah. The list continues back further than that, but cannot be synchronized to the timeline because some of the reign lengths are not specified. The Pharaohs of Egypt can be synchronized to the timeline, starting around the beginning of Ptolemy's canon and moving forward because of synchronisms with Assyria and Babylon. Also, because we know the precise life of the Apis bulls for the period between 663 and 525 BC, the reigns of the pharaohs can be pinpointed down to the month during this time frame. Egypt's precise chronology, like Babylon's and Assyria's, is lost after a certain point. We have monuments, inscriptions, and fragments like the Palermo stone that mention the pharaohs by name, but like the law code of Hammurabi, we don't have enough information to synchronize and anchor them to the timeline. So how do Egyptologists construct their timeline then? Back around 450 BC, about 100 years after Babylon was overthrown by the Medes and Persians, Herodotus, who is often called the father of modern history, traveled to Egypt and interviewed the Egyptian priests in Memphis, Thebes, and Heliopolis. That's where Herodotus got his information about Egypt's history and the pharaohs. His list of pharaohs from Sesostris to Psammetichus III contained about 20 kings and spanned about 500 years. Then, about 200 years after Herodotus, an Egyptian priest named Manetho was commissioned by King Ptolemy II to write the history of Egypt. Manetho's list for the same period between Sesostris and Psammetichus III grew from about 20 kings to over 130 kings, and the time frame stretched to more than 2,700 years. Sir Isaac Newton determined that Manetho's dynasties are almost a complete work of fiction, containing scores of unnamed kings for which we have no other indication that they ever existed. These fictitious dynasties are the basis for the greatly exaggerated early Egyptian history that dates the Great Pyramid at around 2800 BC, over 500 years before the flood. Newton places the building of the Great Pyramid at around 800 BC. Despite all this, Egyptologists openly reject the Bible and cling to Manetho-based Egyptian chronologies. Egyptian chronology is in need of serious revision and must be anchored to known events on the timeline if we're ever going to identify the pharaohs met by Abraham, Joseph, and Moses. Factors that must be considered include the timing of the global flood, when world population was reduced to 8 people, and the dispersion at Babel that marks the beginning of nations and multiple languages. We must also consider the early days when the earth was still thinly populated, and shepherds could feed their flocks wherever they pleased, like Abraham and Lot, and Jacob and Esau. Cities were still small. Levi and Simeon were able to kill every male in the city of Shechem. Nations were still in their infancy, as we see when Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations, were all defeated by Abraham and his 318 trained men when they went to rescue Lot. We will try to unravel the Egyptian chronology as more information becomes available and is understood, but for now we'll continue with what we do know. In the next video, we'll look at the details of the Exodus as we start the 479-year section that goes from the Exodus until the 4th year of Solomon. You can download some of the charts seen in this video by clicking the links in the description or visiting our Pinterest page. The most current version of the Timeline PDF spreadsheet is also available in the description of this video and every video on our channel. May God bless you in your studies, and we'll see you here next time.